guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Tina and today it's time for another one of my makeup and murder series. This is a Get Ready With Me true crime series. It's where I put on my makeup and get ready to go while I talk about true crime stories, so be aware of that. Although this one is sort of based in legend. I found out about this when I was looking up America's first female serial killer because I got kind of curious as to who the heck that was. Several sites put up Lavinia Fisher. I don't think she was America's first serial killer, and you can come to your own conclusion about that. I think that's more myth than reality, but I thought we'd still talk about her and you can make up your mind. While I'm waiting for my notes to load, let's talk about the makeup I'm going to use today because I'm going to be doing this dark red smoky look based on her last statement before her hanging. For primer, I'm going to use the Cover FX primer as well as the very last of my Elizabeth Mott Thank Me Later eye primer. I'm also going to be finishing up my Wet n Wild Photo Focus foundation and combining it with a bit of Milani. And for contour, I'm going to use my Wet n Wild stick. Most of these are in my project pan. Lavinia Fisher, I believe she was born in North Carolina in Charleston in 1793. Her husband John was born in 1791, and they are a pair throughout this entire whole thing. I think they got married around 1809 or something. I don't know why it's not listed on here. They get married and they start operating a inn called the 6 Mile Wayfair Inn. It was called the 6 Mile Wayfair Inn because it was 6 miles from Charleston. There was also a 5 Mile Wayfair Inn. Apparently, thinking up cool names for inns just wasn't a thing. So they're operating this inn, I'm guessing, 1817 or somewhere in there. There aren't any real concrete dates just because of the time period. For my brows, I'm going to use the Brow Power by IT Cosmetics. So they're operating this inn and people start noticing that people are going missing, and there's this big rash of highwaymen are in the area, and highwaymen are basically carjackers of the day. They'd come out with guns as you were going down the road on your buggy and make you stop and take all your stuff, and people would end up dead. And at that time, this was a hanging offense. It would be no different than somebody killing you during a carjacking now. In a lot of states, it's going to get you the death penalty. They know that this large group of highwaymen is operating in the area. It's got a reputation for being a really dangerous area of road. People are disappearing, but they don't know who's doing it. This story has got a lot of myth to it, so I'm going to tell you about a couple of scenarios about how they discovered that these two were involved in this large group of highwaymen. And this is written down way back when, in the 1800s, early 1800s. You can actually look it up, and it's written in very old English handwriting. Yet it's one of those things, it's hard to tell if this was an accurate thing at the time or something that came shortly afterwards. This wasn't brought up in the actual trial. People would stop by the inn and she would give them a cup of tea when they came in. They'd sit down and she'd chat with them. And if she got the inkling that they had money, she'd give them another cup of tea and then she'd escort them to a specific room. She was giving them spiked tea and that it was poisoned with probably digitalis and some things like that. They would escort them into this room, and the bed had like a trap door, so they'd lay down in the bed, pass out from the poisoned tea, and then they'd hit a switch underneath in the basement and the bottom would drop out of the bed, and John would be down there and bludgeon them in the head and kill them if they weren't already dead. Well, the story goes, John Peoples came in one night, was given the tea, but he didn't like tea. While she wasn't paying attention, he dumped it out. She's asking him all these questions, and he's getting really suspicious because he's not drugged and groggy. He's going, what the heck's going on here? She escorts him to his room, and instead of laying down on the bed, he grabs his gun and sits in the armchair that's in the room. Well, they hit the button on the bed. Obviously, he doesn't fall down there. He wakes up to this commotion and realizes, oh shit, I'm about to end up dead. Climbs out a window and takes off and informs the nearest magistrate. They come back and they arrest them. Then they go digging about the property, and supposedly they find hundreds of bodies. Now that part we know for a fact is not true. So that's one story about how this whole thing happened. Or another legend, there's a whole bunch of them, but another one that's really well known. The town fathers realized that there was this highwaymen group operating and robbing people So they set up a sting operation, put together a posse of people. They have this guy, David Ross, standing watch, and 2 people from the Fishers gang find him and beat him unconscious. They pull him into this group. They think he's passed out or dead or whatever. He wakes up, he recognizes her, sees her, and takes off back to town and tells them who is running this highway gang. So I'm going to take my chocolate gold palette and I'm just going to take these neutrals out of here and start working on my lids. Those are just 2 of the stories about how these 2 get caught for running this highway gang or being a part of the highway gang and killing people, supposedly. John Fisher definitely loved his wife. He tried, when they got caught, to get her off and said she didn't know anything about it. They don't believe that at all. On February 18th, 1918, they're arrested for the assault of David Ross. On February 22nd, 1819, Nathaniel Green and John and Lavinia Fisher are all taken into custody. March 23rd, 1918, they're brought up on a writ of habeas corpus. So we're gonna skip ahead. On May 10th of 1819, they're indicted for assault of David Ross and intent to murder. May 27th, the trial begins. Both John and Lavinia plead not guilty. On May 28th of 1918, they're both found guilty. June 2nd, 1819, they're brought before the judge for sentencing, and I don't know if they're sentenced to hang or not right then. September 13th, John escapes from jail using blankets out the window. He tries to help Lavinia escape also. The blanket rope breaks and she can't get down. He's apparently super loyal to her. He stays there and waits to get rearrested because he can't get her out, so he's not going to leave without her. Throughout this entire trial, he tried to get her off in every way he could. He was willing to do whatever it took to get her found not guilty. None of that worked. I'm just using this black in here and I'm gonna really build up this outside corners. I'm gonna take my Modern Renaissance palette and use this Venetian red and start coming in on my lid. After their escape and recapture the very next day, January 17th, 1820, they appear before the Constitutional Court and are sentenced to hang. In February of 1820, they're granted a stay of execution. That runs out on February 18th of 1820 because during this time, there was a whole lot of debate about whether or not they actually wanted to hang Lavinia. It wasn't real common to hang women at the time, I mean white women specifically. They just thought it was going to set a bad precedence, but they were having a huge debate about it, about whether or not they actually wanted to hang her or not. They finally decided they were going to. February 18th, 1820, they bring both of them out to hang them. John repents, begs for his wife's life, apologizes, tries to get her off even at the very last second. That isn't going to happen. They have decided that they are hanging her, and that's pretty much the end of it. She realizes that she's not going to get a stay of execution. They end up literally having to carry her up onto the scaffolding with her screaming and yelling the entire time. There's this myth that she was wearing a wedding dress. She wasn't wearing a wedding dress. What she was wearing was this white, like, overdress thing that her and John were both wearing. They actually paid for these out of pocket so that they could be hung wearing white. So I'm going to take Love, Trust, and Fairy Dust, and it has this really awesome burgundy color in here too. This is my Dirty Little Secrets single that I have in Sangria. I'm just building up on the outer corner with it, and then this Love, Trust, and Fairy Dust in Mystical. Bring that in further. She's expecting this stay of execution. She's literally being picked up and carried onto the scaffolding. She's screaming and cursing, and most people went to their deaths pretty stoic. That was considered the proper way to do it. She was having none of it. Her last words were pretty epic and memorable. If you have a message you want to send to hell, give it to me. I'll carry it. People were apparently completely shocked by the whole thing. It just built up into this incredible legend, one of which that was wearing a wedding dress and was hung in her wedding dress. And she was wearing white, but it wasn't her wedding dress. Wedding dresses of that time typically weren't white. So I'm going to use some NYX glitter glue. Her hanging was quite the spectacle. I'm going to use tempera, and then I'll put Vermeer over it to do my inner corner. The hanging was like this huge deal. Everybody was talking about it for quite some time afterwards. People said that they found hundreds of bodies out on this property. They found 2 bodies afterwards. One they do think was killed by the Highwayman gang. The other was a young black woman. They're pretty sure she was a runaway slave, and at that time that didn't matter to anybody. We're not going to get into how awful that part was, but I'm not going to deny it happened either. I think denying that history happened is a mistake. So I'm taking my broken, messed up under the sea concealer, putting that on. What they were found guilty of was the theft and the beating and attempted murder of David Ross. The rest of it is all myth and legend. There is no evidence that she murdered anybody anywhere. Certainly not in the court case or anything. I don't quite understand how she became known as America's first female serial killer. She was a bad person, don't get me wrong, but she wasn't a serial killer. She's listed as America's first serial killer on tons of reputable sites. I was shocked. So the reason I had picked her name for this week was because when I was looking it up, that was the name that came up everywhere. So it really took me by surprise to find out that it was all basically just legends. Do I think she was a not very nice person? Yes. I think she was decently well off, so very entitled, which is why she threw that big fit about being the hanging. I don't think she actually thought that could happen to her. On one hand, in this story, you have a black woman who we don't even know her name. She was just a young black woman found in the field, and they didn't even look into her death at all. But on the other hand, you have this white woman who throws a big, huge fit because she's committing crimes, and yet she thinks she's above the law simply because of the color of her skin. It's happened for so long and it dates back so far. People just don't understand it. For my blush, I'm going to use the Saharan palette, and I'm going to use B and Sola. I'm just setting with my Rcma no color powder. Unlike most of these, I don't have psychoanalysis thing. Is going to be a bit different. Society was just very different. I mean, don't get me wrong, being a woman at that time was awful. This was the very beginning of the United States, which is why they had the Continental Congress involved. They didn't have the other court systems set up quite yet completely. So justice was a very haphazard thing. I'm taking the black and I'm just going to come around the side, and then I'm going to take this really bright fuchsia and put it on the bottom lid, and I'm just really tightly bringing that around there, more like an eyeliner than an eyeshadow. And then I'm just going to take a brush, soften it up a little bit. I don't think she had any mental illness. I don't think she had anything like that. I think at that time, breaking the law was pretty easy to do, an easy way to make money, and people with not a lot of scruples did so. I don't suspect that they thought they would get caught. Getting caught was probably not something that happened often, which is why they made an example of them. So I'm using New Money and Live-In Lush, which is the light purple and the dark purple, and I'm blending those two together. I'm going to take my Smashbox and Fishnet and Beauty for Real. Fishnet will go on the outer part of my eye, and the champagne will go on the inner part. I have no doubt that this whole thing was in fact what her husband came up with. At that time, you didn't go against your husband. It did happen from time to time. It was very uncommon. And now I'm going to take my Butter London Double Decker lashes. I don't think she was inherently evil, certainly not serial killer evil. They thought they could get away with it. It was worth the risk to them, so they did so. Did they kill the one guy? Who knows? And if they did, it was unlikely that it was her. It was more likely that it was either John or one of the other members of this highway gang, which was fairly large. It was not just the two of them. She was just a product of her time, the criminal part of the time. This is a great example of how even reputable sites can get sucked into really old myths where it's just common knowledge that she was America's first female serial killer, right? By not doing the research to see if in fact that's true or not, it just gets perpetuated. I will try to go figure out who America's first serial killer was. We will do one of these on her when I figure out who it was. So this is the Pacifica Rainbow Drops in Unicorn. Also in my project pan is my Tarte Pro Glow Kit. I'm just gonna take Strobe out of here for my highlight today. It is a gorgeous highlight. And for my lipstick, I'm gonna take Hoola Neon liquid lipstick in DF, and then my Smashbox Always On lipstick in Base Alert and create kind of an ombre look with them. That's it with my lipstick. My thoughts on her are pretty much, she was just one of those people who, because her man was committing a crime and she thought they'd get away with it, and it never occurred to her that she would actually have to pay the ultimate price for it, or probably any price at all. I'm sure she just felt entitled to everything she was doing. I doubt that she gave any thought to anything else. I don't think she was a psychopath. I just think she was one of those people who are like that. I think she was probably a super dramatic person, just judging by what happened when she was young. But who knows? I mean, that could be totally not true. So I just popped on a set of lashes, and I love these lashes. They're by Christina. That was my look for today, and that was the myth and legend of America's first female serial killer. And like I said, I do think that her last words probably are what started the whole thing. If you have a message to send to hell, I will carry it, is pretty dramatic, and it's gonna make people remember you. All right, let me know what you thought of this case and legend. I hope you enjoyed this one. It was interesting to me to do the research and find out just how screwed up everything really was. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye!